My sister boasted Dad would leave her the restaurant chain during our family's annual 4th of July barbecue, loudly telling everyone how she practically ran the business, while I was just the silent investor. At the gala celebrating our father's 40th anniversary in the industry, she was already giving interviews as the future CEO when I approached the microphone during the toast. I smiled and said, "I'm so proud to announce that Dad sold me his 51% stake last month for $2. $3 million. Sarah, you'll love working under my management." The crystal champagne flute slipped from Sarah's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the grand ballroom. 200 guests fell into stunned silence as the pieces scattered across her designer heels. Her face drained of color so dramatically that her foundation looked like chalk against her neck. The reporter from Food and Wine magazine, who had been interviewing her moments earlier, slowly lowered his recorder, his eyes darting between us with the hunger of someone who'd just witnessed a scandal. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her husband Marcus stepped closer, his hand hovering over her elbow as if afraid she might collapse. The investor's dad had invited men in $1,000 suits who controlled restaurant empires across 3 states, watched with the kind of fascination reserved for car crashes. I maintained my smile, feeling the weight of the legal documents in my Hermes clutch, documents that made me the majority owner of Ashford Hospitality Group as of 36 hours ago. For 28 years, Sarah had been the golden child, the one who graduated summa cum laude from Cornell's School of Hotel Administration, who worked 12-hour days at our flagship restaurant, who Dad introduced to everyone as my successor. Meanwhile, I'd been dismissed as the quiet sister who just wrote checks from my trust fund, the one who preferred working behind the scenes. What neither Sarah nor anyone else knew was that for the past 5 years, I'd been the one actually financing Dad's expansion dreams, quietly purchasing real estate, securing loans, and building relationships with suppliers. While Sarah played CEO for the cameras, I'd been learning the business from the shadows, and Dad had finally seen who truly understood the empire he'd built. Sarah's perfectly crafted world was about to crumble, and she had no idea I'd been engineering her downfall since the moment she told our parents I was just along for the ride at last year's board meeting. The revenge I'd been planning would destroy more than just her career. It would shatter every relationship and assumption she'd built her identity around. And the beautiful part was, she'd handed me every weapon I needed by underestimating the silent investor for so long. The industry titans surrounding us began whispering among themselves, their calculating eyes already reassessing which Ashford sister they should be courting. Sarah straightened her spine, clearly scrambling for damage control, but I could see the panic bleeding through her composure. She'd spent years positioning herself as indispensable, never imagining that Dad valued loyalty and intelligence over publicity and self-promotion. Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. "Elena, surely there's been some misunderstanding?" "No misunderstanding," I replied smoothly, pulling out my phone to show the bank transfer confirmation. "The transaction cleared yesterday morning. Sarah's done excellent work as operations manager, and I'm sure she'll continue to excel in that capacity." The deliberate demotion hung in the air like smoke. Operations manager, a title that stripped away everything Sarah had built her identity around. The CEO position, the media interviews, the industry respect, the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, all of it evaporating in real time. Dad approached the microphone, his weathered face unreadable. At 72, he'd built Ashford Hospitality from a single diner into a 15-location empire. His steel-gray eyes found mine across the crowd, and I saw something there I'd been waiting my entire life to see. Respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," his gravelly voice carried across the ballroom, "my daughter Elena has been the backbone of this company's financial success for years. It's time she got the recognition she deserves." Sarah's breathing became shallow and rapid. The career she'd built on being Daddy's favorite was disintegrating in front of the most important people in the industry. Food critics, investors, suppliers, competitors, everyone who mattered in our world was witnessing her spectacular fall from grace. I stepped back from the microphone, my work complete for now. This was only the beginning. Sarah had spent years treating me like an irrelevant checkbook, dismissing my contributions, taking credit for successes I'd made possible. She'd told investors I was just family money with no real business sense. She'd excluded me from strategy meetings I'd funded. She'd introduced herself as the real brain behind Ashford's expansion to reporters while I stood 3 feet away. But what Sarah never understood was that silent doesn't mean powerless. While she'd been playing politics and courting attention, I'd been building an unshakable foundation of control, and now that foundation was about to become her prison. The photographer from Restaurant Business magazine raised his camera. The flash illuminated Sarah's face at the exact moment she realized her carefully constructed future had just vanished. She was about to discover that being underestimated by your enemy is the most dangerous gift you can give them, and I was just getting started. The aftermath of the gala announcement sent shockwaves through the restaurant industry, but the real carnage began the next morning. I arrived at our corporate headquarters at 6 a.m., 2 hours before Sarah typically graced us with her presence. The security guard, Tommy, looked surprised to see me so early. He was used to Sarah's dramatic entrances in her white Tesla, not my quiet arrivals in sensible business attire. "Morning, Miss Elena. Heard congratulations are in order," he said, scanning his badge to let me into the executive elevator. "Thank you, Tommy. Could you please have maintenance change the locks on the corner office? I'll be moving in today." Sarah's sanctuary, the glass-walled corner office with its view of the harbor and her collection of industry awards, had been her throne for 3 years. Every morning she'd hold court there, scheduling interviews and photo shoots that painted her as the visionary behind our success. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd chosen that office specifically because it was the most visible, the most impressive for her endless parade of media contacts. By 7:30, I'd already reviewed the contracts Sarah had been negotiating without Dad's, or now my, approval. The expansion into Miami she'd been promising investors, funded entirely by my personal guarantee on a $12 million loan she didn't even know existed. The celebrity chef partnerships she'd been bragging about, secured through my connections at the James Beard Foundation, where I'd served on the board for 4 years, while she dismissed charity work as not real business. My assistant Rebecca arrived at 8. Stopping short when she saw me behind Sarah's mahogany desk. "Ms. Ashford, Elena, I wasn't expecting. The management structure changed yesterday, Rebecca. I'll need you to schedule individual meetings with each department head today. Also, please draft a memo to all staff announcing that effective immediately, all major decisions require my written approval." Rebecca's eyes widened. She'd worked closely with Sarah for 2 years, had seen how my sister operated with absolute authority. "Should I inform Sarah about these meetings?" "Sarah will be included when appropriate. Right now, I need to understand how this company actually functions versus how it's been presented to the public." The first department head meeting was with Marcus Chen, our head of operations and Sarah's husband. The conflict of interest had always bothered Dad, but Sarah had convinced him that Marcus's MBA from Wharton made him indispensable. I'd been quietly documenting discrepancies in his reports for months. Marcus knocked on the door at 9 sharp, his confidence noticeably shaken. Gone was the swagger he displayed when he thought his wife was inheriting everything. "Elena, I think we need to discuss the accounting irregularities in the Phoenix location," I interrupted, sliding a folder across the desk. "The ones where inventory costs have been inflated by 30% over the past 18 months? His face went pale. "I can explain. Can you explain why those inflated costs coincidentally match the amount you and Sarah spent renovating your Scottsdale home? Because I have the receipts, Marcus. Literally." The beauty of being underestimated was that people left evidence everywhere. While Sarah had been busy playing CEO for the cameras, I'd been quietly auditing every aspect of our operations. Marcus's embezzlement scheme was amateur hour. Fake invoices from shell companies, phantom consulting fees, inflated supply costs, all of it traced back to their personal accounts. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. The question is whether you want to resign quietly and repay the $480,000 you've stolen, or whether you'd prefer I involve the authorities. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, forged invoices, and a detailed timeline of his theft. "Sarah doesn't know about this," he whispered. "Of course she doesn't. She's been too busy giving interviews about her hands-on management style to notice her husband robbing us blind. You have until 5 p.m. to submit your resignation letter and a payment plan." After Marcus stumbled out, I called my private investigator. "Stephen? It's Elena. I need you to dig deeper into Sarah's media relationships. Specifically, I want to know which journalists she's been feeding information to, and what she's been promising them in exchange for favorable coverage." Sarah finally arrived at 11. storming through the office with the fury of someone whose entire world had shifted overnight. She bypassed Rebecca's desk and burst into what used to be her office without knocking. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her composure from last night completely evaporated. I looked up from the contracts I was reviewing. "Running the business I own. Please close the door. We have a lot to discuss. This is insane. Dad would never sell to you behind my back. You don't know anything about operations. I know that our food costs in Denver have been 40% higher than industry standard for 2 years. I know that you've been approving vendor contracts without competitive bidding. I know that you told Restaurant Business Magazine our expansion was self-funded when it's actually leveraged against my personal assets." Sarah's eyes darted around the office, taking in the changed arrangements. Her awards were gone, replaced by my business school diplomas and professional certifications. Her personal photos had been removed. Even her expensive ergonomic chair had been swapped for mine. "You can't just erase me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not erasing you. I'm right-sizing your role to match your actual contributions." I opened another folder folder. Speaking of contributions, let's discuss your media strategy. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the tell-all interview you scheduled with Food and Wine? The one where you plan to discuss our family drama and position yourself as the victim of nepotism? Sarah's face flushed crimson. How did you? The same way I know about everything else you've been hiding, including your plans to pitch a reality show about sisters in business to the Food Network, using our company as your personal stepping stone to celebrity. The final piece of evidence I'd been saving was Sarah's secret contract with a production company. She'd been negotiating to sell our family story, our recipes, our private struggles, everything Dad had worked 40 years to build, to entertainment executives who wanted to turn our restaurant empire into a reality TV spectacle. That was just preliminary discussions, Sarah stammered. Preliminary discussions where you signed a letter of intent giving them exclusive rights to film in our restaurants for 3 years, without Dad's consent, without mine, just your signature, claiming authority you never actually had. Sarah sank into the chair across from me, the fight draining out of her. For the first time in years, she looked smaller than me, uncertain and lost. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to understand what you really are," I replied, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked our flagship restaurant below. "You're not a CEO. You're not a visionary. You're not even particularly good at operations. You're a person who got confused about the difference between being in the spotlight and being in control." The intercom buzzed. "Miss Ashford, the reporter from Forbes is here for your 2 o'clock interview." I smiled at Sarah's shocked expression. "That's right. I'm giving my first interview as majority owner today, about our real expansion plans, our actual financial position, and our new management structure. I'm sure they'll want to discuss the leadership transition in detail." Sarah's perfectly constructed facade was crumbling in real time, and this was still just the beginning. By the end of the week, everyone who mattered in our industry would know the truth about who really controlled Ashford Hospitality Group. And Sarah's dream of being a restaurant empire heiress was about to become a nightmare of public humiliation and professional irrelevance. The Forbes interview went exactly as I'd planned. Reporter Janet Morrison had covered the restaurant industry for 15 years. She knew the difference between authentic leadership and polished performance. When she asked about the sudden ownership transition, I gave her something much better than corporate speak. "My sister has exceptional people skills and a real talent for public relations," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But building a sustainable business requires different competencies. Financial analysis, risk management, strategic partnerships. These aren't as photogenic as ribbon cuttings and food festivals, but they're what actually drives growth." Janet leaned forward. "Some industry observers have suggested this transition was unexpected. How long have you been involved in strategic decision-making?" "I've been funding strategic decisions for 5 years. There's a difference between making choices and implementing them. Sarah implemented beautifully, but the vision and capital came from elsewhere." Within hours, the story was online with the headline, "Silent Partner Takes Control, the Real Power Behind Ashford Hospitality's Success." The article detailed my background, my MBA from Northwestern, my previous successful exits from 2 tech startups, my quiet role financing the expansion everyone credited to Sarah. By evening, my phone was buzzing with interview requests from every major food and business publication. Sarah's phone was buzzing too, but for different reasons. I knew because my investigator had been monitoring her communications since yesterday. The production company behind her reality show deal had pulled out after learning she no longer controlled the business. 3 speaking engagements scheduled for next month were canceled. Her literary agent dropped the book deal she'd been negotiating about building a restaurant empire. But the real masterpiece was still unfolding. At Thursday's staff meeting, I addressed our department heads with surgical precision. "I've completed my review of operations and will be implementing several immediate changes. First, all vendor relationships will be rebid through a competitive process. Marcus Chen has resigned to pursue other opportunities, so we'll need an interim head of operations." Sarah sat frozen as I systematically dismantled every power structure she'd built. Her hand-picked managers were being reassigned. Her exclusive vendor relationships, many of which involved kickbacks she didn't know I knew about, were being terminated. Her signature authority was revoked. Second, we're restructuring our marketing approach. Rather than personality-driven publicity, we'll focus on food quality and guest experience. The PR firm we've been using will be replaced with an agency that specializes in operational excellence, rather than celebrity building. That PR firm had been feeding Sarah's ego for 2 years, crafting her image as a visionary leader while charging us triple the industry standard. They'd pitched her story to reality show producers, arranged for magazine covers, and helped her build a personal brand that had nothing to do with actual business results. Finally, effective immediately, all media requests will be routed through me. We'll be returning to our core mission: exceptional food and service, not entertainment. After the meeting, Sarah cornered me in the parking garage. Gone was any pretense of professional composure. "You planned this," she hissed. This whole thing was planned. Of course it was planned. Did you think I'd let you destroy Dad's legacy with your reality show ambitions? Turn our family business into a circus for cable television? That's exactly what you were doing. You signed away 3 years of filming rights for $250,000. You were going to let cameras follow our customers, our staff, our private family moments, all so you could play restaurant empire princess on television. Sarah's face crumpled. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Everyone expected me to be this perfect successor, to live up to Dad's reputation. The media attention helped build our brand. The media attention built your brand. Our restaurants succeeded despite your publicity stunts, not because of them. Do you know what our Denver location's Yelp rating was before you started doing cooking segments on morning television? 4.8 stars. Do you know what it is now? 4.1. Because you turned our professional kitchen into a performance space. The truth was even worse than I was revealing. Sarah's media strategy had been actively damaging our business. She'd prioritized photogenic dishes over customer favorites, hired telegenic staff over experienced professionals, and scheduled publicity events during our busiest service periods. Our veteran servers had been quitting because they couldn't do their jobs properly with cameras and journalists constantly underfoot. I can learn, Sarah pleaded. I can change how I approach things. We can work together. No, we can't, because you fundamentally don't understand what this business is about. You see restaurants as stages for your performance. I see them as businesses that employ 300 people whose livelihoods depend on our success. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen, my investigator. Package delivered to your office. The final piece. I have to go, I told Sarah. I have actual work to do. Back in my office, Stephen's package was a manila envelope containing the evidence that would end Sarah's career in this industry permanently. Photos of her meeting with our biggest competitors' executives, recordings of phone calls where she'd discussed selling them our proprietary recipes and supplier contacts, email chains planning a coordinated departure of key staff to their operation. Sarah hadn't just been building her celebrity brand. She'd been planning to jump ship with everything she could steal. The reality show was meant to be her audition tape for a better offer. She'd been using our family business as her personal resume while secretly negotiating to destroy it. The beautiful irony was that her new employers had been playing her from the beginning. They never intended to hire her. They just wanted our trade secrets and customer data. Once they realized she no longer controlled anything valuable, they'd ghost her completely. But I wasn't going to wait for them to discard her. I was going to make sure everyone in the industry knew exactly what Sarah Ashford really was. A traitor who'd tried to sell out her own family for fame and money. Friday morning, I scheduled an emergency board meeting. Our investors needed to understand the full scope of what they'd narrowly avoided. By noon, every major restaurant group in the country would know that Sarah Ashford was poison, unemployable, untrustworthy, and radioactive to any respectable operation. The sister who'd dismissed me as just money was about to learn that money talks much louder than publicity ever could. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 a.m. Friday in our main conference room. I'd invited not just our investors, but also representatives from the Restaurant Association, food industry journalists, and the executives from Davidson Restaurant Group, Sarah's secret suitors. The room buzzed with tension as people tried to understand why they'd been summoned so urgently. I entered precisely at 8, carrying 3 manila folders and a laptop connected to the projection screen. Sarah arrived moments later, clearly having been caught off guard by the meeting she hadn't organized. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began, taking my place at the head of the conference table, the spot Sarah had occupied for 3 years. I've called this meeting to address serious breaches of fiduciary duty that have come to light since the ownership transition. Sarah's face went white. She'd expected another personnel shuffle, not a public trial. Before we begin, I want everyone to understand that what you're about to hear involves potential criminal activity that undermines not just our business, but the integrity of our entire industry. I opened the first folder and spread photos across the conference table. High-resolution images of Sarah meeting with Davidson Restaurant Group executives at various locations over the past 6 months. There she was at the Four Seasons, documents spread between them. There she was at a private dining room in Chicago, shaking hands with their CEO. There she was in their corporate offices, clearly comfortable and familiar with the space. These photographs document my sister's secret relationship with our largest competitor. The meetings began in January and continued through last week, well after she knew about the ownership transition. Robert Steinberg, our lead investor, picked up one of the photos. Sarah, what is this? Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The room felt electric with tension. Let me help you find your voice, I said, opening the laptop, since pictures sometimes need context. The first audio file filled the room with Sarah's voice, clear and unmistakable. The secret to our marinade is the 24-hour process with specific citrus ratios. Dad would kill me if he knew I was telling you this, but your chef could replicate it exactly with the right measurements. Gasps echoed around the table. Our marinade recipe had been a family secret for 40 years, the foundation of our signature dishes that customers drove hours to experience. The second recording was worse. Once I'm running things, we could coordinate our expansion strategies, maybe even look at merger opportunities down the road. You'd get our established customer base and proven recipes. Sarah finally found her voice. Those conversations were hypothetical. Nothing hypothetical about this, I interrupted, playing the third file. Sarah's voice again. I can deliver our complete supplier database, including the exclusive contracts Elena doesn't know about. Your procurement costs would drop 30% overnight. The room erupted. Our suppliers had given us exclusive pricing because of loyalty relationships my father had built over decades. Sarah was selling them out for promises of executive positions she'd never actually have. Or this, I continued, playing the final recording. Sarah's laugh echoed through the speakers. Elena thinks she's so smart with her business degree, but she has no idea how restaurants actually work. Once she realizes she can't handle the pressure, she'll need someone experienced to buy her out. We could structure the deal so you get everything for half of what it's actually worth. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that room understood they'd just witnessed the attempted murder of a family business. James Davidson, CEO of Davidson Restaurant Group, finally spoke. I want to be clear that these conversations were preliminary discussions only. No agreements were made, no information was transferred, and no contracts were signed. Of course not, I replied smoothly, because Sarah never actually had the authority to deliver what she was promising. But that didn't stop her from trying. I opened the final folder, revealing bank statements and transaction records. What Sarah didn't know was that I'd been monitoring suspicious financial activity for months. The leak of our expansion plans to Food Business magazine, that came from Sarah's office. The sudden appearance of our signature dishes at competing restaurants in Portland and Seattle traced back to vendor relationships Sarah had been sharing. The documents painted a picture of systematic betrayal. Sarah had been feeding information to competitors for months, believing she was positioning herself for a lucrative exit. Instead, she'd been signing her own professional death warrant. The Davidson Group was never going to hire you, Sarah, I said, looking directly at her. They were using you to destabilize our operation so they could acquire our assets at a discount during the chaos. You were their inside saboteur, not their future executive. Sarah's breathing became shallow and rapid. The career she'd built, the respect she'd cultivated, the future she'd envisioned, all of it crumbling in front of the most important people in her professional world. This is character assassination, she whispered. This is evidence, I corrected, holding up a USB drive. Everything I've shown you today is documented, recorded, and verified. The question now is how we handle it. Robert Steinberg cleared his throat. What are you proposing, Elena? Sarah will resign from all positions within Ashford Hospitality immediately. She'll sign a non-compete agreement preventing her from working in the restaurant industry for 5 years, and she'll publicly apologize for her attempts to damage our business relationships. You can't force me out completely, Sarah protested. I have rights. You have the right to face prosecution for industrial espionage and breach of fiduciary duty, I interrupted, which is exactly what will happen if you don't accept these terms. The FBI takes corporate espionage very seriously, especially when it involves interstate commerce. The threat wasn't empty. My attorney had already reviewed the evidence and confirmed that Sarah's actions met the federal definition of economic espionage. She'd used her position to gather and transmit trade secrets with the intent to benefit foreign economic interests. In this case, our competitors. James Davidson stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. Davidson Restaurant Group will not be pursuing any business relationship with Ashford Hospitality. As he gathered his papers, I smiled. Actually, Mr. Davidson, I have one more thing for you. I handed him an envelope. That's a cease and desist order regarding the recipes and supplier information Sarah shared with you. Our intellectual property attorneys are very thorough. Sarah watched her potential salvation walk out the door, taking with him any possibility of the executive position she'd been promised. She was alone now, surrounded by investors and industry leaders who just witnessed her complete professional destruction. The resignation letter is already prepared, I said, sliding a document across the table. All you need to do is sign. As Sarah stared at the paper that would end her career in the only industry she'd ever known, I felt the satisfaction of perfect justice. She'd spent years dismissing me as irrelevant, treating our family business as her personal stepping stone to fame. Now she was learning the price of underestimating the silent partner who'd been building an empire while she played dress-up for cameras. The meeting ended with Sarah's signature. shaky and defeated. As the room emptied, she remained seated, staring at her hands. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you forgot that this business was never about you," I replied. "It was about the legacy Dad built and the people whose lives depend on our success. You were willing to destroy all of that for your own ambition." Sarah's empire of publicity and promises had collapsed in less than an hour, but my revenge was far from complete. The news of Sarah's resignation hit the industry like a bomb on Monday morning. Restaurant Business magazine ran the headline, "Ashford heiress ousted in corporate espionage scandal," with the full details of her attempted betrayal. The story went viral within hours, shared across every food industry publication and business network in the country. By Tuesday, Sarah's personal brand, the one she'd spent 3 years building, was completely toxic. The James Beard Foundation removed her from their Young Professional Leadership Council. The Restaurant Association revoked her membership. The culinary school where she'd been scheduled to give a commencement speech next month canceled her appearance. But the most devastating blow came Wednesday morning, when I implemented the final phase of my plan. "Rebecca, please get Marcus on the phone," I said, settling into my office chair with my coffee. Sarah's ex-husband answered on the second ring, his voice strained and desperate. "Elena, I've been trying to reach you about the embezzlement accusations. I can explain everything. Actually, Marcus, I'm calling to thank you. The evidence you provided about Sarah's financial mismanagement has been extremely helpful." Silence. Then, "What evidence?" "The detailed records you gave our investigators about Sarah's unauthorized expense accounts, her misuse of company credit cards, her falsified travel receipts. Your cooperation with the federal investigation has been invaluable." Marcus's voice cracked. "I never gave anyone any evidence about Sarah." "What federal investigation?" "The one that began when you reported her financial crimes to the FBI last Thursday. Didn't you file that complaint? The one detailing how Sarah had been embezzling company funds to pay for her publicity campaigns and personal lifestyle?" "Elena, I swear to you, I never—" "That's interesting, because the FBI seems to think you did. In fact, they're treating you as a cooperating witness against Sarah. I'm sure they'll want to discuss your testimony about her illegal activities." I hung up and immediately called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, clearly hoping for some kind of reprieve. "Sarah, I have unfortunate news. The FBI will be contacting you today about a federal investigation into financial improprieties at our company. Apparently, someone provided them with detailed evidence of embezzlement and fraud." "What? Who would—" She stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning. "Marcus, that bastard is trying to save himself by throwing me under the bus. I couldn't possibly comment on an ongoing federal investigation," I replied smoothly. "But I understand they have extensive documentation of unauthorized transactions, falsified receipts, and misappropriated funds." The beauty of this final move was its simplicity. Marcus had been embezzling money to fund their lifestyle, but all the transactions had gone through accounts Sarah controlled. The forged invoices bore her signature. The falsified expense reports had her approval. On paper, she was the mastermind, and he was just following orders. Neither of them realized I'd been carefully documenting their crimes for 2 years, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy the evidence. When Marcus resigned last week, he'd unknowingly signed a confession that implicated Sarah in every fraudulent transaction. "This is insane," Sarah said, panic creeping into her voice. "I never stole anything. Those were legitimate business expenses. $47,000 in charges at high-end clothing stores, $62,000 for a marketing retreat in Cabo that was actually your anniversary vacation, $115,000 for consulting services from a shell company that turned out to be your personal decorator." Each number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been so confident in her untouchability, so certain that her status as Dad's chosen successor protected her from scrutiny. She'd never imagined that her silent investor sister was building an airtight case against her. "I can pay it back," she whispered. "Too late for that. The FBI doesn't care about repayment once they're investigating federal fraud charges. And with the amount involved, we're talking about serious prison time." The line went quiet except for Sarah's ragged breathing. I could practically hear her calculating, trying to find an escape route from the trap I'd spent years constructing. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "I want you to understand what you've lost," I replied. "Your career, your reputation, your marriage, your freedom, all sacrificed for your ego and greed. Marcus will tell them the truth. He'll admit he was the one stealing." Marcus is currently in federal custody. Apparently, when the FBI showed up at his apartment this morning, they found evidence that he was planning to flee the country. Packed bags, liquidated bank accounts, a fake passport. He's been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and attempting to evade federal prosecution. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told me she understood. Marcus had panicked when he learned about the investigation and made everything worse by running. Now he looked guilty of even more serious crimes and desperate enough to say anything to reduce his sentence, including testifying that Sarah had masterminded the entire scheme. "You orchestrated this," she said, her voice hollow. "All of it. The FBI, Marcus running, everything. I simply provided evidence of crimes that were actually committed," I corrected. The fact that you and Marcus chose to commit those crimes, and that Marcus chose to flee when confronted with evidence, are decisions you made independently. You destroyed my marriage. Your marriage was destroyed the moment Marcus decided to embezzle $480,000 to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. I just made sure the evidence came to light. The federal charges were real. Sarah and Marcus had actually committed the crimes they were accused of. I'd simply ensured that their illegal activities were discovered at the most strategically devastating moment possible. The media is calling you a whistleblower, Sarah said bitterly, the responsible sister who discovered corruption and did her civic duty by reporting it. That's an accurate description. You planned this for years. Every smile, every family dinner, every time you seemed supportive, you were gathering evidence to destroy me. I was protecting Dad's legacy from people who saw it as their personal piggy bank. The fact that those people happened to be family made it more painful, not less necessary. Sarah's career was over. Her marriage was over. Her freedom was in jeopardy. And her name would forever be associated with greed, betrayal, and federal fraud charges. The sister who'd spent 3 years positioning herself as a restaurant industry leader was now a cautionary tale about the consequences of corruption. I'll fight this, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. With what resources? Your assets are frozen pending the federal investigation. Your lawyers won't return your calls. And your credibility is so destroyed that no jury would believe you over documented evidence and cooperating witness testimony. There has to be something. There's nothing, Sarah. You lost the moment you decided that this family business existed to serve your ambitions instead of the other way around. I hung up and immediately called our head of security. Please change all the access codes for our properties. Sarah Ashford is no longer authorized to enter any Ashford hospitality location. The final insult was perfectly symbolic. Sarah had spent years treating our restaurants as her personal kingdom, arriving whenever she pleased, holding court with industry contacts, using our spaces as backdrops for her publicity campaigns. Now she was banned from entering the very buildings where she'd once reigned supreme. By evening, news of the federal investigation had leaked to the media. Sarah's mugshot, taken when she was arrested that afternoon on federal fraud charges, appeared on every major business news website. The golden girl of the restaurant industry had become its most spectacular failure. As I watched the news coverage from my office, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. For 28 years, Sarah had coasted on privilege and Dad's reputation while contributing nothing of substance to our success. She'd treated talented employees as props, loyal customers as marketing opportunities, and family recipes as commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. Now she would face the consequences of those choices in federal prison, while I rebuilt the business she'd nearly destroyed with her greed and vanity. The silent investor had finally found her voice, and it was saying exactly what the restaurant industry needed to hear. Actions have consequences, and legacy matters more than publicity. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office of our newest location in Nashville, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as our opening day crowd filled every table. The reservation list was booked solid for 3 months out, and food critics from across the Southeast had already published glowing reviews of our authentic approach to hospitality. Sarah was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement, with Marcus receiving 12 years for his additional charges of fleeing prosecution and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that their crimes had threatened the livelihoods of hundreds of honest employees and violated the trust of customers who'd supported our family business for decades. Neither of them had spoken to each other since their arrests. Marcus's cooperation with federal prosecutors had painted Sarah as the mastermind, while Sarah's attempts to shift blame had only made her look more calculating and remorseless. Their marriage dissolved in a flurry of mutual accusations and competing plea bargains. Ms. Ashford, Rebecca's voice came through the office intercom. The reporter from Wall Street Journal is here for your interview. This would be my 15th major media interview since taking control of the company. Unlike Sarah's superficial publicity campaigns, these interviews focused on business strategy, financial performance, and operational excellence. Industry publications now featured me on their power lists and rising leaders rankings, recognition based on actual achievements rather than manufactured celebrity. The Wall Street Journal wanted to discuss our expansion strategy, which had become a case study at business schools across the country. In 6 months, we'd opened 4 new locations, improved profit margins by 18%, and achieved the highest customer satisfaction scores in our company's history. More importantly, we'd done it all while treating employees fairly, sourcing ingredients ethically, and maintaining the quality standards that built our reputation. Elena Ashford represents a new generation of restaurant leadership, the article would say. While others chase social media fame and reality TV opportunities, she's building sustainable success through financial discipline and operational excellence. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several of Sarah's hand-picked managers had struggled to adapt to a culture where substance mattered more than style. 3 had resigned rather than accept reduced responsibilities, while others had embraced the opportunity to focus on their actual expertise instead of playing politics. Our staff turnover dropped to its lowest level in 5 years, once employees realized they were valued for competence rather than appearance or media savvy. The veteran servers who'd been quitting during Sarah's publicity campaigns came back, and our customer service scores reflected their renewed commitment to excellence. Dad visited the Nashville location for our grand opening, his pride evident as he watched the smooth operation of a restaurant that prioritized food and service over cameras and publicity. At 73, he'd finally found peace knowing his life's work was in capable hands. "Your sister could have had all this," he said quietly, standing beside me as we watched the dinner rush unfold. The respect, the success, the legacy. All she had to do was focus on the business instead of her own reflection. Some people never learn the difference between being important and being effective, I replied. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen, my investigator. Sarah filed an appeal of her conviction today, still claiming prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective counsel. Also filed a civil suit alleging you framed her for crimes Marcus committed. I deleted the message without responding. Sarah's latest legal maneuvers were desperate attempts to rewrite history from her prison cell. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The convictions were solid, and her credibility was so destroyed that even her appellate attorneys were struggling to construct coherent arguments for her innocence. The civil suit was particularly absurd, considering that all the evidence of fraud had come from transactions she'd personally authorized and documents bearing her own signature. Her claims of being framed by her sister required believing that I'd somehow forced her to steal money, forge receipts, and lie to investigators over a period of several years. Ms. Ashford? The Wall Street Journal reporter Patricia Williams entered the office with her photographer. "Thank you for making time for us today. I have to say, this is a remarkable transformation story." "Thank you, Patricia. Though I'd argue it's more of a return to our authentic values than a transformation." The interview covered our expansion strategy, our approach to employee development, and our commitment to sustainable business practices. Patricia was particularly interested in the cultural changes I'd implemented. "Your predecessor, your sister, was known for a very different leadership style. How do you account for the dramatic improvement in both financial performance and employee satisfaction?" "Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or getting the most attention," I replied. "It's about creating systems and culture that allow everyone to do their best work." Sarah was focused on external validation. I'm focused on internal excellence. "Some industry observers have suggested that your sister's legal troubles were convenient timing for your takeover. How do you respond to those suggestions?" "The legal troubles were consequences of choices Sarah made over several years. My acquisition of majority ownership was a separate business decision based on the company's long-term strategic needs. The timing was coincidental, not coordinated." It was a careful answer that avoided the complete truth while remaining technically accurate. Sarah's legal troubles were indeed consequences of her own choices. I'd simply ensured those consequences became visible at the most strategically advantageous moment. After the interview, I reviewed the quarterly reports that would be released to investors next week. Our revenue was up 32%. Our profit margins had improved across all locations, and our customer retention rates were the highest in our company's history. More importantly, our employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in every category, from workplace culture to advancement opportunities. The business Sarah had treated as her personal stage was now a model of operational excellence that other restaurant groups studied and emulated. Industry publications regularly featured our management practices, our financial transparency, and our approach to sustainable growth. That evening, I had dinner at our flagship location, sitting at the corner table where Dad used to hold court with suppliers and old friends. The restaurant hummed with the quiet efficiency of professionals who took pride in their work. Servers moved seamlessly between tables, kitchen staff maintained perfect timing, and guests enjoyed the kind of unhurried, authentic experience that built lifelong loyalty. This was what Sarah had never understood. That true success and hospitality came from genuine care for the people you served, not from manufactured drama designed to attract cameras. While she'd been chasing celebrity, I'd been learning the fundamentals that actually created value: quality, consistency, respect, and financial responsibility. As I signed the check, using my Mont Blanc pen on the leather folder embossed with our family crest, I reflected on how completely the tables had turned. Sarah was spending her evenings in a federal prison cafeteria, eating processed food off metal trays while planning feudal appeals. I was building the restaurant empire she'd thought was rightfully hers, using the skills she'd dismissed as unimportant and the values she'd abandoned for fleeting fame. The silent investor had found her voice and used it to create something worthy of our father's 40-year legacy. Sarah had gotten exactly what she deserved: nothing. And I had gotten exactly what I'd earned through years of careful planning, strategic thinking, and genuine dedication to excellence. Justice, it turned out, was even more satisfying than revenge, especially when they were the same thing.